since COVID, when we changed to a Zoom live, it's been like every day I watch myself. It's terrible.
Yes, that is strange. I know. So hi, it's a pleasure to meet you, Alex, from the LSE Cities. I'm Erica Thompson from the LSE Data Science Institute, and I was hoping that we could have a conversation today about sustainability at LSE and beyond to mark Earth Day. So we've got a few things to talk about. I wondered if we could start with a question about sort of responsibility of working on climate-related topics. So I wondered whether you think that we as academic researchers have a responsibility both to work on important things like climate change, but maybe also to make sure that our own actions are commensurate with that work and the information that we have. Maybe you could say a bit about that.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. Well, I think as researchers, as teachers, because some of us also are involved in teaching, but also as through our own behavior, I think we are shaping the future in a way. I feel that within my field and working in cities obviously relates quite directly with climate change issues. We always try to explore how the cities affect the society, but in a way, the society affects the climate affects the society too, through the city and the way we build the cities.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, considering the realm of the data, I think the way, for example, at LSE Cities, we use data helps demonstrate how policies and individual behaviors, reflect in daily life and creates evidence to policymakers to make a change. And I've been working in projects, in particular in the Middle East, where energy consumption is really high, where most of the citizens drive and the levels of motorization are really high, and that affects health and CO2 emissions in ways that are, per capita much higher than in other parts of the world. And a lot of the times you talk to people there and they're like, oh yeah, there's traffic, there's pollution, everyone knows. But creating evidence as a researcher and showing the numbers and comparing the numbers of the Middle East with, between the Middle East, different cities, but also with the Middle East and other cities of the world, I think it highlights the need to change. So
yeah, that's really interesting. I think yeah, that's really interesting. I think having that data and just being able to see it visually as well is a really important motivation, because otherwise it's easy to just kind of imagine that it's all sort of okay, or it can't be that bad. When somebody actually comes along and says, well, here are the numbers, you've got to recognize it, don't you?
Exactly. And comparing, the comparison is also very important, because then you see, oh my God, we're producing 10 times more CO2 or whatever the number is. And that makes you reflect quite a lot on what you're doing. But then, as you said, I think our own behavior also shapes that. So I can't be, oh, let's not drive and then teaching students saying, oh, active mobility is the right way to go, and then driving everywhere in London. So in that sense, I think our own behavior should reflect what we want. Of course, sometimes it's difficult because there are limitations, but within those that what's possible, I think it's our own. It's important for us to show and do it also within our private lives. I think that's fundamental.
Absolutely. I mean, that really resonates with me, and I think especially when you're teaching and trying to go out to people and sort of use this data to be able to show that we need to make changes here. Having that kind of self-consistency, being able to say, I'm doing it myself, I'm leading by example, I'm not just preaching something to other people that I'm not willing to do myself.
So I think in terms of the LSE, I've been involved in different activities, most of them with colleagues here at LSE Cities, but also beyond LSE Cities. We've been doing vegetarian potlucks. We've been, involved in a group, which is the LSE Bicycle User Group, trying to create, better conditions for people to cycle to LSE. We've been growing sometimes our own food. We had tomatoes growing in our windows. So there's a few things, like labeling computers, saying, don't forget to turn off your screen and your computer and your lights, etc. We've been involved in here at LSE Cities and beyond with different sustainability actions in a way. I think definitely, academia and LSE should do more. Well, we should reduce reduce printing, reduce usage of, some type of materials, reuse and recycle. For example, we needed a new chair, and someone brought us a chair that was in a basement. Why not? Why are we buying new stuff when there's people getting rid of chairs that are still okay, or computers? So there's a lot of waste that it's not waste in a way. And I think more and more, and students, particularly at LSE with so many masters, which are the 1 year. So you have students buying a whole lot of stuff, cutlery, plates, duvets, bicycles, etc., that then are, what do they do with these things when they leave? So I think in a way, as an infrastructure within the state, as the way we teach and involve teaching in a lot of actions, like teaching about public policy, teaching about cities, teaching about climate change is important as academics. But also, one of the things that I find it interesting is that we changed a lot with COVID. Why can we not change with climate change in a way, right?
Yeah, really.
We've created hybrid teaching, which avoids traveling a lot of the times. We are meeting through Zoom rather than, traveling again. We are eating at home more than eating outside, because a lot of the times when we eat outside, we have plastics and stuff that we throw away. So I think there's so much that we can do within the work experience and within LSE as part of LSE, that I think it's quite important.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think there's little things and there's big things, aren't there? And I think the little things are really important, because I suppose I see them as sort of gateway drugs. You start doing a little thing like getting rid of plastic straws, or signing a petition, and that kind of takes you down the first step, and then you think, well, if I can do that, why can't I do something else? Or if I can do that, why can't I do something else as well? So I think these things that people maybe write off as being a bit trivial are actually really important. So it's nice to hear about the little things as well. And then, like you say, then the big things. And obviously, we've made some huge changes over the last 2 years with the pandemic and all of the changes that's forced onto us. Been particularly interested in is flying, and obviously that's one thing that has changed a lot in the last couple of years. So like I said, I did a PhD back in 10 years ago or so on climate change, and as I was doing that, I kind of came to the realization that I couldn't quite justify flying for conferences anymore, or for personal travel. Being lucky enough to live in the same country as the rest of my family, obviously I'm privileged to be able to make that decision, but I kind of came to it and sort of thought, well, I'm not going to give up flying, but I'll just think carefully about every time I might be getting on a plane, and every time I would kind of think carefully about it and decide that it didn't really justify it. So I haven't been on a plane now for actually nearly 14 years.
Oh, wow.
And that's been really interesting, because it sort of forced me to be more actively collaborative, and to think about, to think proactively about how I'm going to develop my networks of collaborators and what kinds of things I'm going to work on. And if I am going to, say, a conference in Europe, to kind of combine it and make sure that I'm making the most of the trip, because it's going to take me quite a long time. And so then from there, I've been thinking about emissions budgets for travel and for research. So LSE has been, I think, doing quite a good job of sustainability generally, but obviously for all universities, one massive thing is the staff travel, or at least it has been up until 2 years ago. And so I suggested an idea of having carbon budgets for staff travel, which would basically work in the same way as financial budgets, right? It isn't any more difficult. You have a number that's associated with each, with each trip, in the same way as the cost. You have the carbon cost, and so you can manage it in just the same way. It just takes another field in a database. But that it was quite difficult because it didn't really fit with the systems at the time. But I hope that going forward from COVID, and as we as we now have the opportunity of having seen how well video conferencing can work, we're on Zoom now, we've got Teams, we've got all these other technologies that actually do generally work in a way that they didn't generally work 10 years ago. Hopefully we have an opportunity to start thinking about these kinds of more radical changes. And I think people are coming on board as well, with declarations of climate emergency, and with people sort of really starting to take climate change and the need to make large changes more seriously. I think we do have that opportunity.
And I think following what you were saying, I think it's our role to influence also national policies, because, for example, my parents are in Portugal. I tend to travel, unfortunately, but why are we not building a network, a rail network that reaches Europe in a different way, and it doesn't leave the extremes out of it in a way, because it's so easy to go to France, and then from France to Portugal could be also very easy. And the other thing is the cost of the trains in the UK. I tend to use the train, but it's often cheaper to fly, which shouldn't be the situation, right? We should be influencing the cost of the trains, particularly in the country where we live, to be cheaper than flying. And so our role as individuals, as you are doing, but also as citizens, being activists, being demanding, but also as teachers and researchers, influencing this change, the policy change, which should be obvious, that trains should be cheaper than flying, in particular in short distancing, right?
Yeah, it really should. Yeah.
It's sad, and I'm hoping that your work and the work of so many others, and eventually our work too, but can change a bit of that situation. Well, I think that we can't forget that sustainability includes social aspect of it. So if it's not inclusive, and if there's not an equity, it's not sustainable in a way. And I think it doesn't happen all the time. A lot of the actions that are sustainable, they're also more sustainable for those who have lower income. So, for example, if we improve walkability, if we improve public transport, and if we improve, I'm always talking about my side of the research, but a lot of the times when you improve a city, when you provide better housing, and when you provide access to green spaces, you're improving climate change actions, and you're also promoting more equity and fairness within the city, right? So I think, well, depends on how you do it, but a lot of the times when you improve for some, you improve for everyone. That's my perspective. But what do you think, Erica?
I mean, that's really my experience as well. I totally agree. I think that in general, the kind of the environmental option is also the inclusive and accessible option. If you look at conferencing on the internet, rather than having to fly in person to large places and have an aeroplane ticket and a accommodation for a week and all the rest of it that goes along with that, versus being able to sit at home and interact with other researchers. Yes, there are pros and cons on both sides, but certainly, as someone with 2 small children, myself, for example, there's a lot of conferences that I just would never have gone to, and they've been completely accessible to me for the last 2 years. And that's been actually quite eye-opening. I hadn't really realized that this was all there. And it's kind of, I think it's important to keep those gains that we've made, because that accessibility to people who don't have a travel budget or who have caring responsibilities or all these sorts of things is really important. It's part of, like you say, the sustainability, the kind of social sustainability, and the equity and inclusivity are part of environmental sustainability, and they're very intimately connected, I think. Yeah, you're right. Do you think that there's anything sort of more structural in academia that we could do that would help to make, these kinds of choices more accessible to other people who might be watching this conversation and thinking, hey, how do I get involved? What could we do there?
So I think, as academics, we tend to in terms of the language we use, in terms of the outputs we create, we tend to be exclude a bit the general audience. And I think connecting to the general public through better engagement, using people as there's this idea now of the citizen researcher, so using citizens as part of your research, engaging, but also the way we create our outputs that are often, academic papers and reports that policymakers and practitioners may read, but most of my family is not going to read that, in a way, let's say, right? If you don't have people working in this area or academics. So I think it's also part of our role to be able to transmit well, and that means that it's for a lot of people, not only for the academics, but we can create outputs that resonate with the population and those who we want to, influence, or those with whom we want to engage or learn from. And for example, more and more, there's this discussion within academia of the impact. And I think that's quite important now, because if you want to change behavior, or if you want to learn from other people, you need to understand how you do it. And I think using art, for example, we created in a project set of cards that create awareness for kids of the challenges of using public space in Kuwait. On another project, we are aiming at having an exhibition that shows the constraints of roads, car-centric development, and the development or use of roads in mobility and car driving as a primary way of moving within a city, where you have photos of never-ending cycle lanes that don't lead to anywhere. Like they're there, but like where are they going? Where you show that there's amazing conditions, sidewalks are great, but then there's no cafes, there's no mixed use, so people are not walking. They have the infrastructure, but they don't use it. So showing, I think, interacting with people, this idea of creating an impact that goes beyond academia, it's more and more important to change, and improve or adapt behaviors, but also to learn from other people, because I learn a lot every time I engage with local researchers or local people in my own research. When I talk to people, and then you can that you can share through your own research what you learn from others, and I think that's quite important in our in our life, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's the kind of the individual, and then there's the connected individual with everything else, with other people, you know, within an environment, and with the kind of wider infrastructures that are there. And I think, you know, that's sort of literal in the sense of your research, but also metaphorically in the sense of sort of action on climate change, and how we sort of position ourselves within this space and decide what kind of actions to be taking or to be pushing. That's great. So that's super interesting to hear all of that. Thank you, Alex.
But Erika, I just want to say that your work is fundamental. This idea of understanding what is the impact of what we're doing, these budgets and these costs, because I think if LSE has that, we can think ahead and where do we want to be in 20 years, right? And then what are the costs of what we're doing? And then we know where to address. So, you know, I feel that it's a personal thing as researchers and teachers, but there's a lot of responsibility on actors like the institutions and LSE in particular in our case, but not only LSE, but municipalities, national governments, and then, you know, EUs and other international institutions that deal with issues of climate change. But your work is fundamental.
Yeah, and it comes down to data, doesn't it? It comes down, you know, obviously you're from LSE Cities, I'm from the Data Science Institute. For you, it's all about cities. For me, it's all about the data. But I can see we're on the same page here. And yeah, having that data and being able to take it and say, what, you know, here is what's happening, and here's our motivation to make some changes in whatever direction, whether that's personal changes or institutional changes.
Yeah, and I think the DSI, by connecting us, is doing a great job, right? Because in the end, most of us want the same. And sometimes we might, you know, reach further if we collaborate. And I think this conversation hopefully is part of it, or, you know, and could be a good starting point. We'll see how it goes.
I hope so. That's great. No, I think we've started a lot of topics, and there's definitely a lot more conversation that we could have, but maybe we should leave it there for now. So thank you so much, Alex, for taking the time to have a chat with us today. It's really interesting to hear all the things that you've been doing. And yes, I look forward to carrying on our conversation.